So here's a wild thought for you. What if everything you are, your personality, your fears, your talents, isn't really you? What if it's all just a product of your environment? That's the core idea behind a theory called behaviorism. And yeah, it was a pretty radical attempt to understand the human mind, basically by ignoring it altogether.
I mean, just listen to this quote. This is John Watson, one of the big names in behaviorism, and he is not messing around. He's saying, give me any baby, and I can turn them into literally anything. A doctor, an artist, even a thief. The message here is crystal clear. For him, nurture wasn't just part of the story. It was the whole story.
So yeah, the central claim here is kind of mind-blowing. They basically said human nature doesn't exist. It's a myth. The idea was that we're all born as blank slates, tabula rasa, and every single thing that makes you, well, you, is just written onto that slate by your experiences.
Okay, so if you're going to make a claim that big, you need some rules, right? So how did they plan on building this whole new science of behavior? What were the fundamental ideas holding this whole thing up?
It really came down to three main pillars. First, it's all about learning. Everything you are is learned. Second, and this is a big one, they were totally anti-mentalism. That means no talking about thoughts, feelings, or goals. Why? Because you can't see them. They thought that stuff was just unscientific fluff. If you couldn't observe it, it didn't count. And third, they believed there were no real differences between species when it came to learning. The basic laws that work on a pigeon or a rat, they figured those same laws work on you and me.
All right, so how does all this learning actually work according to them? Well, their first big tool, the one that really got the ball rolling, is something called classical conditioning. You already know how this works, even if you don't know the name for it. It's all about how our brains just automatically connect the dots between things. You know, like when the smell of fresh-cut grass instantly makes you think of summer, or a certain song comes on the radio and bam, you're right back in high school. That's it. That's learning by association.
And the classic example, of course, is Pavlov and his dogs. Let's break it down. It starts simple. A dog sees food, it drools. No learning required, that's just a reflex. But then Pavlov starts ringing a bell right before he brings out the food. He does this over and over. Pretty soon the dog's brain forges a link. And eventually, just hearing the bell is enough to get the dog drooling, even when there's no food in sight. A totally new response has been learned, or conditioned.
But this idea wasn't just about dogs drooling. Nope. John Watson decided to take this principle and test it on a human baby in what has to be one of the most, well, infamous experiments in the history of psychology. So they had this baby known as little Albert, and at first he was totally fine with the little white rat. He'd even play with it. But then, every single time he reached for the rat, the scientists would sneak up behind him and slam a hammer against a steel bar. A horrible, terrifying noise. You can imagine what happened next. Pretty soon, just the sight of the rat sent Albert into a panic. And it didn't stop there. The fear spread, it generalized to other furry things, like a rabbit, or even a Santa Claus mask. For the behaviorist, this was it. This was proof of how our phobias are born.
You've probably seen this idea pop up in fiction, too. The most famous example is probably A Clockwork Orange. The main character is basically cured of his violent tendencies through a pretty brutal form of conditioning. They forced him to watch violent movies while giving him a drug that makes him violently sick. The end goal? To make his brain associate violence with the feeling of being sick to his stomach, creating this deep gut-level aversion. Okay, but let's be real. Not all learning is just automatic reflexes like drooling or fear. A lot of what we do is voluntary, right? We make choices. And the behaviorists had an answer for that too. They had another powerful tool to explain how we learn from the consequences of our own actions. And this is where we get the distinction between classical and operant conditioning. So what's the difference? Well, think of it this way. Classical is all about involuntary automatic stuff, like Pavlov's dog. The dog doesn't choose to drool. Operant conditioning, though, that's all about voluntary behavior. It's about choices. It explains how rewards and punishments shape the things we decide to do.
This whole idea was summed up perfectly by a psychologist named Edward Thorndike in what he called the law of effect. And honestly, it's something we all just intuitively get. Behaviors that are followed by something good, we do them more. Behaviors followed by something bad, we do them less. Simple as that. We just learn to do what works. I mean, think about the little red notification bubble on your phone apps. Why do you click it? Because there is a potential reward, a new message, a like.
That's operant conditioning in your pocket, shaping your behavior one little tap at a time.
So how do you use this to teach something really complex, like, say, teaching a pig to dance? I mean, a pig isn't just going to bust out a waltz on its own, right? So you can't just wait around to reward it. Instead, you use a clever technique called shaping. You start small. You reward the pig for just, I don't know, stumbling in the right direction. Then, once it's doing that a lot, you only reward it for a half turn. You keep rewarding these successive approximations, these little steps along the way, and before you know it, you've built up the entire dance, piece by tiny piece.
And for a long time, this was it. For decades, behaviorism was king. It wasn't just a theory, it was pretty much the way psychology was done. But nothing lasts forever. Cracks started to show up in the foundation. Little bits of evidence started popping up here and there that just didn't fit. Things that conditioning couldn't seem to explain. And it all boiled down to one huge question. Could conditioning really explain everything? Was the human mind, with all its complexity, really just a simple switchboard of inputs and outputs? Turns out the mind wasn't a blank slate after all, not even close. For example, some experiments showed rats learning their way through mazes without any rewards at all. They seemed to be creating mental maps in their heads. Whoops, can't say mental if you're a behaviorist. Then there was the discovery that we seem biologically pre-programmed to make certain connections. Like, if you eat something new and then get sick, you'll instantly blame the food. Your brain is hardwired for that. And you can't ignore instincts. You can try all day to train a pigeon to flap its wings for food, but it's just going to peck, because that's what pigeons do. The whole blank slate idea was really starting to fall apart. But the final nail in the coffin, it didn't come from a lab with rats in mazes. It came from a completely different field, linguistics. And it would change psychology forever. The person who delivered it was the brilliant linguist Noam Chomsky. He took a long, hard look at the behaviorist explanation for language and just tore it to shreds. He pointed out that trying to explain language with reinforcement is, well, it's kind of silly. Think about it. When you were a kid, did your parents give you a treat every time you said a grammatically correct sentence? Of course not. And if behaviorists just stretch the word reinforcement to mean any kind of social approval, well, then the word becomes so vague it's basically meaningless. Chomsky's critique was a watershed moment. It's often seen as the event that officially kicked off the cognitive revolution. Suddenly, it was okay to talk about the mind again. All those messy, unobservable things, thoughts, beliefs, plans, memories, they all came roaring back into the center of psychology. So, does that mean behaviorism was a total waste of time? Absolutely not. While the grand, all-encompassing theory collapsed, the practical tools it gave us are incredibly useful. I mean, the principles of conditioning are still the foundation for so much, from how we train our pets, to incredibly effective therapies for treating phobias, to educational strategies that help people with severe autism. The tools survived even when the theory didn't. And that really leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? Behaviorism might not be the grand unified theory of everything they hoped it would be, but you can't deny that its central idea still has a powerful ring of truth to it. Just take a second and think. How many of your own daily habits, your little preferences, or even your deepest fears, were slowly, quietly built, one little reward and punishment at a time?